I'm Jim Decker, great-grandson of William C. Decker, grandson of Ed Decker, and my father's name was Harold. Well, as we grew up, we knew very, very little of William C. He never really told anybody where he came from. He never told much about his life. He probably was in the Confederate Army, and when he came up here, it wouldn't have been very fashionable to tell anybody that you were Confederate. It wasn't until the last 25 years that we were for sure that William C. came out of Ohio. I remember talking to John Williams, and he was the only man that I ever talked to who said he knew William C. And he told my brother and I about William C. And his story was he was walking down the road, and William C. was a big guy. And he always drove a horse with a buggy with springs on it. And when he sat on one side of it, it always kind of leaned. So he knew it was old William C. coming. But he was a kind of a gruff guy. And so they didn't pay much attention to him. They kind of stayed away. But old William C. drove up, stopped, and said, "Get in, I'll take you home." And he said, well, I was kind of scared. And he said, "Oh, it's not all that far, I'll walk." And William C. said, "God damn it," I said, "get in, I'll take you home." He said, I got right in. He drove me down right up to the house, let me out at the back door, said, "Isn't that better than walking?" That was from a guy that claimed to have known William C. So he was a kind of a gruff guy, as I understand, and a moneylender. I have not seen a lot of the information, but there was some around when I was younger that my Uncle Don saw and read and said that when he lent money to a farmer, he tied up everything he had so that he'd get it back. But the unusual thing I learned later out of an incident that William C. went to Texas after some kind of a scrape he got into and was gone for several years. And the unusual part about that was Grandma and the kids stayed in Wynn, and they ran a livery stable in Wynn. And the thing was that Grandma continued to run the business. And in those days, it was a little unusual, but she actually had farms in her name because she had repossessed them and so on that he'd lent money on. But she kept the business going while he was out of town, as I understand. When he came back, it was business as usual. He was an atheist. We knew that. He claimed to be an atheist. He would debate ministers on religion anywhere, anytime. Obviously, he was had very strong feelings about his beliefs. It's my understanding that he got a tombstone. He got a big stone off the farm and was going to have it be his tombstone. But when they went to cut it, it didn't cut well, it broke. Mm-hmm. And so the tombstone he bought the stone and had it designed how he wanted it done. Oh, he built his own casket. And he used to get in it and show people how he was going to look when he died. Yeah, he built it. And I've seen pictures of the casket he built. And when he died, my grandfather took the casket into town and had him put handles on it and line the inside of it, as caskets are today. But yeah, he was buried in that for a little while. Oh, he was buried in it totally, but he was buried on the farm west of the house for a couple of years or so. And there's a kind of a funny story about that. Everybody thought that William C. was the power in the family, but after he'd been up there 2 or 3 years, Grandma said she's going to hire somebody to move him down to the cemetery. And the family said, you know, that's where William C. wanted to be buried. And she said he was. But it's time for him to be down the cemetery where everybody else is. They dug him up and moved him down. And his tombstone went with him. Yeah. Well, one of the McQueens told a story that they came down the street, or down the road there, and they were digging him up. And they were so frightened that they went all the way around the square mile with their horses to go home rather than to go by while they were digging the old man. One of the strange things I have seen, 2 obituaries that were written about William C. when he died. One was he wrote himself, but the paper wouldn't put it all in because it was way too long. And the other one, his daughter Amy, Dr. Amy, wrote it. Didn't sound like the same guy. And one of the things I do know occurred that it was mentioned, I believe, in Amy's obituary that he'd been in the Civil War. But it was not mentioned in his obituary as anybody ever saw it said. And there was some question as to whether he was in the Civil War or not. And as you found out, if he was, we don't know what side he was on. But that was part of the mystique that went with William C. You can see his tombstone over in the Lincoln Cemetery that has Thomas Paine's Age of Reason carved in the top of it. I read part of it. I hadn't read the whole thing, but it is. I think it's more political than it was religious. I think it was a feeling that he had about the sovereignty of the nation more than anything else.
William and Cordelia's children, there was Hannah.
She, as I recall, her dress caught fire when she was sealing an envelope. She'd written a letter, and she burned to death. As I recall the story, they found her in the road, and she apparently died while she was looking for some help. I don't know all the children, but they had, my grandpa was O.E., Oscar Edward. Then they had a son, Charles, that lived in the north. They had Amy, who was Dr. Holcomb. I don't remember Amy, but I remember her husband. He lived in Mount Pleasant, and I used to go with my dad up to visit him. We'd go up once or twice a year, and his name was Ferris Holcomb, and he lived in a big stone house. And he was a little guy, very small, old guy, and Amy and Ferris had one son, and he was William. Strange, but it's my understanding that when he was small, Amy felt that his forehead wasn't developed as much as it should be. So until he was 3 or 4 years old, she had him in nightshirts, so that he had to crawl around on the floor, believing that it might expand his forehead. I don't know if it worked, but anyway, it was one of Amy's things. Amy died in Traverse City at the insane asylum, and the undertaker there in town was years later was a friend of my dad's, and he had the body shipped down on the train, and but it didn't show up for several days. It was in the summer, and so they planned a funeral, but they had to postpone it a couple of times because the body just wasn't showing up. Well, when it showed up, he got a hold of Uncle Ferris and said, you know, I think we got to have the funeral right now. And he said, it's starting to get right. And so they went up and had a graveside service that afternoon. Took Amy out to this Lincoln Cemetery, and she was buried there. And William, the son, always felt bad because his mother didn't have a proper funeral. So I remember when his father died, and he had the same kind of a funeral for his father that his father gave his mother, because he just never felt that Ferris did right by it. But he went out to Washington State and was gone 3 or 4 years, and came back as a doctor, kinda. My father said he wasn't a doctor. My father said when he came back, he said he wasn't gone long enough to be a doctor. However, he went to work at the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor. And my Aunt Letty was so proud, she lived here in Lansing, of having a doctor in the family. When she needed surgery, she had Dr. Holcomb do the surgery. A couple of years later, he wound up in jail because he wasn't a doctor. So